Hello. Today we are going to finish up our notes on the urinary system by looking at the ureters, the bladder, and the urethra. First off, let's start with the ureters. We talked about the kidneys last time and how the kidneys get rid of their waste products. They filter out the blood and they make urine. But what happens to that urine? How does it make it to the point where it can be expelled from your body? Ureters are the tubes that attach to the kidney to the bladder. So once you make the urine, they go from the ureters, from the kidneys down the ureters into the bladder. They're continuous with the renal pelvis. They run behind the peritoneum and they have peristaltic movement as well as gravity. Here you can see them as little yellow tubes connecting the kidneys to the bladder. Let's talk about the bladder. There's not really much more that we're going to talk about the ureters. The bladder is a smooth, collapsible, muscular sac. It temporarily stores the urine. Hopefully it's not permanent. You want to get rid of that urine. There are 3 openings in the bladder. 2 from each of the ureters on the superior part, both the left and the right part of the superior part of the bladder, and then 1 on the inferior part, 1 that leads to the urethra. In males, the prostate gland surrounds the neck of the bladder. So here you see a little space between the bottom of the bladder and the wall of muscle called the external urethral sphincter. That little space in males would be where you would find the prostate. Three layers of smooth muscle, collectively called the detrusor muscle. Mucosa is made up of transitional epithelium. The walls are thick and folded in an empty bladder, kind of like a severely deflated balloon. The bladder can also expand significantly without increasing that internal pressure due to the special kind of cell walls, walls made of cells, the tissue that makes up the bladder, called transitional tissue. It is able to have the layers slide past each other so the bladder itself can expand without increasing pressure on the bladder or the urine within. A moderately full bladder is about 5 inches long and holds about 500 milliliters of urine, about as much as you get in a bottle of water. It is capable, however, of holding up to a full liter of water, or urine in this case. So empty bladder here, you see it kind of folded up in the red. It can expand all the way out into that yellow space. That's the point where you are probably having serious trouble with holding back your urine, as once it expands to that point, when you start increasing the urine that is held in it, that does increase the pressure. That's about the point where your body says we can't hold it back anymore. And when it can't hold it back, it expels it through the urethra. The urethra is a thin-walled tube that carries urine from the bladder to the outside of the body by peristalsis. It is a rhythmic squeezing, and since it is part of your smooth muscle, you can't control it. Once you release the bladder, you cannot then stop it permanently. It will continue until that bladder is empty. Once you release this external urethral sphincter, that is. The internal urethral sphincter is involuntary. The external is voluntary. It's the reason why you don't automatically start peeing once your body fills up with urine. Here you see the internal sphincter, smooth muscle, and the external sphincter. One major difference between genders is the length of the urethra. In females, they don't have a prostate and they don't have a penis. Therefore, their urethra is much shorter than male urethras. Location: in females, it is anterior to the vaginal opening. In males, travels through the prostate and the penis. You then have three different types, three different parts of the urethra. Prostatic urethra that travels through the prostate. Membranous urethra, in which you carry urine that eventually meets up with another part of the urethra that we'll talk about in the next chapter. And the spongy urethra, which is pretty much the entire length of the penis. One other big difference, of course, is function. Females only carries urine, doesn't have to carry anything else. In males, however, it does carry urine, but there's also a fork in the passageways that also leads to where you produce sperm and semen. Therefore, part of the urethra is also used as a passageway for sperm and semen. Voiding it. Both sphincter muscles must open and relax. The internal urethral sphincter is relaxed after stretching of the bladder. Once that internal sphincter is relaxed, urine is forced past the internal urethral sphincter and the person feels the urge to void. However, they do not automatically pee at this point. That just tells the brain it's time to let the person know the bladder needs to be emptied. But that person must voluntarily relax the external urethral sphincter in order to pee. One major thing that this controls is fluid, electrolyte, and acid-base balance. Well, that's one reason why you have your urinary system. You have to filter out all these things carried in your blood, which is the passageway of your body. Blood composition depends on three factors: diet, cellular metabolism, and urine output. Obviously, what you eat determines what nutrients and what chemicals you carry in your body. How well your cells can utilize those chemicals and what waste products they create and how quickly they do it. And urine output. How quickly are you getting rid of these waste products entirely from your body? Kidneys have four roles in maintaining it: excretion of nitrogen-containing wastes, previously discussed in the urea and the uric acid and all those others. Maintaining water balance of the blood. Water is a neutral pH. So maintaining water balance also ensures proper pH, but it also maintains that you still have that 55% plasma, 45% red blood cells and erythrocytes, and then that 1% or less of the buffy coat. It helps maintain that percentage in the blood so that your blood doesn't become too watered down or too thick. Helps also maintain the electrolyte balance of the blood. Maintains all those salts, all the different ions, all the different chemicals in your blood to make sure that it's able to carry the oxygen, fight off diseases, all the different functions that your blood carries out in the body. Normal amount of water in the human body. You've probably heard when you were younger that humans are about 70% water. When you heard it, that's about true. You probably were about 70% water. However, that composition changes throughout your life. Babies are about 75% water. As you become a child, you move to about 70, and then when you are in your teens, you'll probably go down to 65 to about the point where when you were a young adult, late teens, early to mid 20s. You settle out at about 50% if you're a female and about 60% if you're a male. Once you get into the elderly, about probably age 50 or 60, you'll see that number start dropping a decent amount to about when you are in your 70s and 80s, you'll settle out at about 45% water. So you start very high water, and as you age, get into elderly and get closer and closer to death, your water amount of your body, the percentage, drops from really high at about 75% to just under half at 45%. Water is necessary for many bodily functions, and levels obviously have to be maintained. How this water is found is in two different places, intracellular and extracellular fluids. Intracellular is inside the cells, mainly your cytoplasm. About 2/3 of all body fluid is maintained in cytoplasm in your cells. You also have fluids outside the cell. Interstitial fluid, fluids between the tissue layers, fluids between the cells themselves. You also then would have things like mucus has fluid in it. And then, of course, blood plasma. Blood plasma contains fluid. So here's your total body water. Volume about 40 liters. So if you think about a 2-liter bottle of pop, about 20 of those contains all the fluids in your entire body. It is 60% of your body weight. So if you weigh 200 pounds, 120 pounds of that is bodily fluid. If I did the math right. I'm pretty sure I did it right, but don't hold me to that. About 40% of your body weight, about 66% of that fluid is intracellular fluid. About 25 liters of that. And then extracellular fluid, the other third or so. About 20% of your body weight, 80% of it is the interstitial fluid, stuff that you find in between the cells, your mucus, in between the tissue layers. Then, of course, you have blood plasma. We're not going over this, but if you want this slide, there's your slide. Link between water and salt. Water and salt is very, very important. One is you have to maintain a certain percentage of salt volume so that you don't get an isotonic solution. You don't really want problems with your water and salt balance. So you have to maintain electrolytes like sodium, potassium, calcium ions. A bunch of those metals are important in the salts. You don't focus as much on things like chlorine or fluorine or iodine, the non-metals that help make the salts. In fact, if you have just chlorine ions floating around, those tend to be poisonous. You don't want those floating around. Sodium you don't really want mixing with water, but in the small amounts that you have, it tends to be okay. It is also important, of course, in transmission of signals in your muscles and in your nerves. If you change that balance, it causes water to move from one compartment to another. This can alter your blood volume and blood pressure and can also impair the activities of cells. Water intake must equal water output. What you put out through your urine or through sweating or through breathing must then be replaced by water being brought into the body. Sources for water intake are foods and fluids or water produced from metabolic processes. If you are constantly making energy, constantly doing stuff in your cells, you will have some water made as a byproduct of that can then replenish that which you have lost. Main way that you can tell if you need water is thirst. If you are thirsty, it means your body is not going to complain if you replace it through intake of fluid. Sources for water output. How do you lose water? Insensible things that you can't sense, such as the water vapor that you breathe out of your lungs every time you breathe out. You don't feel that you are losing water vapor, but you are. You also lose some in perspiration. Whether you feel it constantly when you are outside and hot or running or biking or playing sports and you feel the perspiration, or if you're just sitting inside, you are always losing some water through your skin. If you're outside and hot, you're obviously losing quite a bit through perspiration. If not, you are losing much, much less through perspiration. Some leaves the body in the feces, and the main way you get rid of it is urine production. So you lose about 2.5 liters per day. About 1.5 in the urine, 700 milliliters insensible via skin and lungs through the breathing out of the water, or like I said, you constantly losing some water through your skin. About 200 milliliters through sweat, and about 100 milliliters in your feces. So you need to replace that every day. About 1.5, about what you put out in urine, you need to then drink about 1.5 liters per day. Most people will also bring in about 3/4 of a liter in their food as well. And then you will produce about 250 milliliters, about 1/4 of a liter, through your metabolism, through what your body does naturally throughout the day. Maintaining it, if you drink more than you put out, you'll have very dilute urine, as your urine is more and more water and less urea. More concentrated or a lower amount of urine is produced if you start losing water and are not replacing it. Such as if for some reason you were stuck out in the desert, you'll notice you will not produce as much urine. You will also find as well, throughout the day, you will probably normally empty your bladder 3 or 4 or 5 times a day. If you are exercising, say you're running a marathon, you'll find you probably are not producing a lot of urine at that point because you are losing higher amounts in your increased breathing rate. You are losing more water vapor. You are sweating more than normal, and you're also not bringing in a lot of fluid while you are running the marathon. Therefore, your body will start conserving larger amounts of water and producing less urine. Or if it does produce urine, you'll find it has a very strong yellow color, as a much higher amount of it is urea and uric acid, and a much lower amount of it is water and fluids. You have these cells called osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus. They monitor small changes in blood composition to determine what the water levels look like in your body for that time. If they activate, the thirst center in the hypothalamus is notified and you become very thirsty. That means they're detecting lower amounts of water in the blood plasma. A dry mouth, due to decreased saliva, also promotes the thirst mechanism. If you're not producing as much saliva, which even right now, if you haven't eaten in a while, you'll find if you stick your fingers in your mouth is wet. You're producing a decent amount of saliva. If for any reason you have a dry mouth, that probably means you are lower on fluids, so your body is decreasing the amount of water it is losing to saliva, therefore producing less saliva, therefore producing a dry mouth. That might also be, I don't know, but that might also be why you tend to need to drink a lot when you are going through a huge speech or something. You are exhaling quite a bit more than normal and losing quite a bit more water than normal, therefore needing to keep your mouth dry or needing to keep your mouth wet, as it is losing a lot more moisture to the atmosphere and you need to replenish that in your body. But I'm not 100% sure that that's why it is. Two hormones tend to regulate this water balance. The main one is ADH, anti-diuretic hormone. Diuretic means producing water. So the presence of this anti-diuretic means you are absorbing more water into your body. If you have less of this anti-diuretic hormone, then more water is put into your urine. If you do not release this ADH hormone, then you have a disease called diabetes insipidus. It is a diabetes, but it is not like the diabetes like the type 1, type 2. That's diabetes mellitus. This is diabetes insipidus. This occurs when you don't release that hormone, and it leads to a huge amount of water and urine output. Therefore, normally it would say drink about 1,500 milliliters of water to replenish what you lose in the day. People with diabetes insipidus might have to drink 2.5 to 3 liters or more per day because they have frequent, huge amounts of dilute urine. They lose water very easily through their urine. So they have to drink a lot more water and a lot more fluids in order to make sure that their water levels stay the same. On top of ADH, you also have aldosterone, which instead of regulating the water, regulates the sodium content of the extracellular fluid. Sodium is the electrolyte most responsible for osmotic water flows. Water follows salt. So if you absorb a lot of sodium, water will follow that. So instead of making sure you absorb the water, it's absorb the salt, and the concentration of the salt goes up. To dilute it to get back to a normal concentration, water will follow that and dilute it. Therefore, not being kicked out in the urine. You also have the renin-angiotensin mechanism. When cells of this are stimulated by low blood pressure, the enzyme renin is released into the blood. Renin produces angiotensin II. This causes vasoconstriction and the aldosterone release, which you will remember, aldosterone absorbs the water, or absorbs the salt, which causes water to follow it. The result is increased blood volume and an increase in blood pressure. So if you are losing a lot of fluid, you will have lower amounts of blood. You will also have lower blood pressure. This constricts those vessels and also releases the salt into the blood, which then water will naturally dissolve into the blood to bring that salt concentration back down to a normal level. This will increase the blood pressure and the blood volume. And that is it. We are done talking about the urinary system. If you wish to see more about the urinary system, we do not have time to go over a lot of it. But here is more information that hopefully you can pause if you really want to learn more about how your body is able to maintain constant system of blood. In our next video, we are going to start the reproductive system. We start with, I believe, males and then females. And then in our second lesson, we will discuss development of the child and then further birth of the child.